For our Bible study this evening, we're trucking on in our study of the life of King David. Last week was kind of not my favorite lesson about David's life when his son raped his daughter and his other son murdered the original lawbreaker. It's kind of a hard lesson. But it really is sort of the beginning of the downfall for David and his family. So we're in 2 Samuel 14 this evening. Again, just to make sure that you remember what's going on, Absalom killed his half-brother Amnon because Amnon had raped Absalom's full sister Tamar. He tricked her into coming into his room, and then he raped her and then wanted nothing to do with her. Because he didn't love her, all he was interested in was what he could get from her. And so Absalom got revenge. He laid awake for a couple years, trying to figure out how he was going to do it. And then we saw how that plan was executed. And then, because he was guilty of pretty big bad stuff, he went to hide out in the area north and east of the Sea of Galilee, up in a place called Geshur, where his grandfather was the king of that territory. So he was there for 3 years after that event. And so when we get to 2 Samuel 14, things are still all separated. Absalom is still up north with his grandfather. David is in Jerusalem alone with only all the rest of his wives and children. But Absalom would be the heir apparent to the throne of Judah, and so he was hopeful to see him. Let's look at 2 Samuel 14. We'll read down just a little bit. Actually, hold that thought. Just so you remember, we've covered this before, but in the Old Testament, there is a provision for something called the blood avenger, the Goel. The blood avenger is a male relative who goes to collect a life for a life. So if I intentionally kill Cody, somebody from his family, I'm assuming probably Rodney, or maybe the chief of police, one of the two, is going to come after me and hunt me down to take my life, because God had that equation in the Old Testament, a life for a life. You take a life, we're going to reclaim that life by taking the life of the guilty party. You can read about that in Numbers 35 and Deuteronomy 19. We also learn in Joshua that God set up 6 cities of refuge. They're scattered all over Israeli territory. Kadesh and Shechem and Hebron on this side of the Jordan River are places where if you are guilty of killing somebody, you can go there and not be dead until there is an appropriate trial. Over on this side, they're not labeled very well, but you've got, I never get the order right, Golan up here, as in heights, Ramoth, and then down here is Bezer someplace. So these 6 cities, you accidentally kill somebody, you can go there until there is a trial and you're supposed to be safe. So now we'll read 2 Samuel 14. Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. So Joab sent someone to Tekoa and had a wise woman brought from there. He said to her, "Pretend you're in mourning. Dress in mourning clothes and don't use any cosmetic lotions. Act like a woman who has spent many days grieving for the dead. Then go to the king and speak these words to him." And Joab put the words in her mouth. Okay, so Tekoa, Hebrew Bethlehem. Tekoa is about right here. It's south of Jerusalem. It's about 6 miles away from Bethlehem, and close to Hebron as well. So she is not somebody that David could have recognized. He would have known nothing about her story. She wasn't in the news. It didn't show up in his feed. He had no idea what was going on with this lady. She is a stranger. Joab, again, is the general of David's army. He is the nephew, the son of David's sister, and he is trying to put some things back together. I don't know why. He's not a great man. He doesn't seem to have a lot of compassion. It always sort of feels like Joab is sort of playing his own hand, not really worrying too much about anybody else and what's going on, whatever suits him the best. It's not clear as we read those first few verses in the original language if David is missing Absalom or if he is still angry at Absalom. The word that the NIV translates was it longs for? Yeah. It can kind of go either way. It can either be a positive thing or a negative thing. Okay? It's not really clear. I suppose it's possible for both of them to be true at the same time. You can want to see somebody even though you're really angry at them or they've really hurt you. So Joab enlists the help of a woman from Tekoa. So she comes to tell David a very sad story, which Joab has given to her. Let's go down to verse 4. When the woman from Tekoa went to the king, she fell with her face to the ground to pay him honor, and she said, "Help me, your majesty." The king asked her, "What is troubling you?" And she said, "I am a widow. My husband is dead. I, your servant, had 2 sons. They got into a fight with each other in the field, and no one was there to separate them. One struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant. They say, 'Hand over the one who struck his brother down, so that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed. Then we will get rid of the heir as well.'" Okay, so that's all that Old Testament Mosaic law, life for life. You killed somebody, like Ron White says, we will kill you back. That's the way it rolls. And then the woman goes on, "They would put out the only burning coal I have left, leaving my husband neither name nor descendant on the face of the earth." The king said to the woman, "Go home. I will issue an order on your behalf." But the woman from Tekoa said to him, "Let my lord the king pardon me and my family, and let the king and his throne be without guilt." The king replied, "If anyone says anything to you, bring them to me, and they will not bother you again. I promise." She said, "Then let the king invoke the Lord his God to prevent the avenger of blood from adding to the destruction, so that my son will not be destroyed." David said, "As surely as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son's head will fall to the ground." All right, so she has made three pitches to get what she's looking for. The first time David said, "Yeah, I'll write you up an order. That'll be fine. Thanks for coming in and have a nice day." She said, "Well, that's actually not quite everything I was looking for." She asks again for a little more clarification. She ultimately is trying to get David to turn this into a spiritual thing. She's looking for him to bring in the name of God, to make some sort of a vow or an oath, to make sure that her poor son, who probably didn't really mean to kill his brother, that he'll be okay. And that she'll have a child left and there will be grandchildren for generations to come. And so finally David says, all right, I swear on a stack of Bibles with God as my witness, nothing bad is going to happen. Then verse 12. Then the woman said, let your servant speak a word to my lord the king. Speak, he replied. The woman said, why then have you devised a thing like this against the people of God? When the king says this, does he not convict himself? For the king has not brought back his banished son. Like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be recovered, so we must die. But that is not what God desires. Rather, he devises ways so that a banished person does not remain banished from him. And now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. Your servant thought, I will speak to the king. Perhaps he will grant his servant's request. Perhaps the king will agree to deliver his servant from the hand of the man who is trying to cut off both me and my son from God's inheritance. And now, your servant says, may the word of the Lord my king secure my inheritance. For my lord the king is like an angel of God in discerning good and evil. May the Lord your God be with you. Okay, do you see what she's done there? She got David to rule as the king on the fact that a brother has killed a brother, and that it might be she'll be without an heir. The belief apparently is that if Absalom doesn't come back, that there isn't anybody else who will be the king. She seems concerned, but we know it's really more like Joab is concerned that there's going to be an opening on the throne for Israel, and so you got to get Absalom back in town. Again, I'm not really sure I understand where Joab is thinking about all this, because he doesn't seem to do anything ever unless it benefits him in some way. So I don't know what he's striving for here. He's not just trying to make a love connection. He doesn't see how miserable the king is and just wants to make him feel better. I don't believe that's the case. So as she unloads the story, there's that passage there in verse 14 about the water spilled on the ground. I know it dates me and makes me look like a really old guy, but all I could hear when I read that was da 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 da, was the days of our lives thing. Like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. It's the same idea, that it's all spilling away and there's no way to get it back. Time is short. Look, David, you got to make this right, because eventually you're dead. We're going to need a king, so let's get the king back here. He's clearly the right guy. Absalom he clearly should be the king. He's pretty, he's handsome, the people like him. Let's bring him back. Okay? Let's get things right. So, verse 19. Then the king said to the woman, verse 18, don't keep from me the answer to what I'm going to ask you. Of course not. Let my lord the king speak, the woman said. The king asked, isn't the hand of Joab with you in all this?
David's not as dumb as I thought.
Yeah, I know. He's a little smarter than you think.
He may be a soldier boy and a musician, but as surely as you live, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything my lord the king says. Yes, it was your servant Joab who instructed me to do this, and who put all these words into the mouth of your servant. Your servant Joab did this to change the present situation. My Lord has wisdom like that of an angel of God. He knows everything that happens in the land. The king said to Joab, "Very well, I'll do it. Go, bring the young man back." Okay, so David knows. I get the impression as I read this that Joab is probably standing just right there as all this is going on, feeding her lines when she forgets them. Probably, this is all his big scam. And I'm assuming it's also true that for the last 3 years that Joab has been saying, "David, let him come. We need to bring him back here. He's the crown prince now. We can't have him hanging out someplace else in exile. You should bring him back." "No, I'm not bringing him back." What he did was unforgivable. So after 3 years, Joab figures out a way to trick David into doing it. Joab fell with his face to the ground to pay him honor, and he blessed the king. Joab said, "Today your servant knows that he has found favor in your eyes, my lord the king, because the king has granted his servant's request." Then Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said, "He must go to his own house. He must not see my face." And so Absalom went to his own house and did not see the face of the king. All right, so David allows Absalom to come back. He can return, but there are conditions. He is in his home, apparently under house arrest. He's not supposed to be out doing anything. And he's not going to see the king's face. He's back in town. He can be near his family. Family can come see him, but he's not going anyplace else. So he's been away for 3 years. The separation from David is going to continue. In verse 25, we start to learn some more things about Absalom. In all Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. Whenever he cut the hair of his head, he used to cut his hair once a year because it became too heavy for him. He would weigh it, and its weight was 200 shekels by the royal standard. 3 sons and a daughter were born to Absalom. His daughter's name was Tamar, and she became a beautiful woman. Okay, so what do we learn there? He's beautiful. Gosh, he's good looking. No flaw in him. From the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, he is an absolute perfect specimen of humanity. I cannot even begin to imagine what he looks like, but he must be something else. Like any model. I don't know who I think the most beautiful guy in the world is, but Absalom is apparently, right up there with him. We also learn about his hair. Long, luxurious hair. Do you know how many pounds 200 shekels is? Do your notes tell you?
3.5 to 4 pounds.
Okay, my stuff said about 5.
That's a lot of hair.
That's a heckin' lot of hair, especially to grow every year. Hair normally grows about a half an inch a month, 6 inches a year, which you can apparently increase by drinking caffeinated drinks and eating lots of protein. But
Water and wine back then.
I'm not so interested. I think probably another thing that's going on here, why his hair is so heavy, is because he's, in the words of Carly Simon, he's so vain. He probably thinks the song is about him. Don't he? Don't he? Don't he? Because I know that for the royal family, as we've seen in the last chapter or two, that they dress very well. And so I'm going to assume that pretty boy Absalom is also taking care of his luscious locks all the time. That he's brushing it, 300 strokes a night. He's massaging essential oils and things into his head to make it smell nice, to keep it from being dry and crusty and flaky. He wants to keep it all under control. And so it's full of olive oil and perfume and probably jewels and bangles and baubles and stuff too. So he's got a lot of hair, which is going to come into play here in a couple of chapters. But we also know that he is old enough to have children. He's got 3 sons and a daughter. There are no names of the children, of the sons. That's interesting because they would have been in line for the throne. So if there's no names there, it's possible that they died as children or something, and that Tamar is the only one who has survived. Anybody got any questions or comments so far?
What's his sister's name?
Tamar is his sister's name and his daughter's name. Junior. Okay? All right, verse 28. Time passes. Absalom lived 200 years. Nope. Absalom lived 2 years in Jerusalem without seeing the king's face. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king, but Joab refused to come to him. So he sent a second time, but he refused to come. Then he said to his servants, "Look, Joab's field is next to mine. He has barley there. Go set it on fire." So Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Then Joab did go to Absalom's house, and he said to him, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?"
You won't answer your text.
"Pick up your phone." Absalom said to Joab, "Look, I sent word to you and said, 'Come here, so I can send you the king to ask, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me if I were still there,'" because he'd be living in the palace with Grandpa there. He'd be free. "Now then, I want to see the king's face, and if I am guilty of anything, then let him put me to death." Okay? It has been about 5 years now since David and Absalom have laid eyes on each other. It's been 5 years at least since they've spoken or embraced. He'd like to see his father. I don't really know if it's because he just misses his dad, or if it's because he knows if he's ever going to be the king, he's got to go back to the court. So he summons Joab. Joab doesn't come. He calls him again, "Come over." Joab refuses to come. So, to get his attention, Absalom has his field of barley set on fire. That seems like a crazy overreaction in order to get a response, but it's effective because Joab does come over. Absalom wants to see his father. No matter what, he wants to go back to the court. And he says, "If I'm guilty of anything, then let him put me to death."
Was he guilty of killing his brother? I guess he forgot that part.
I was wondering.
Well, now if Absalom sees that he has righteously avenged his sister's disgrace, then I suppose it's possible he could see that he's done nothing wrong. And maybe he believes that his dad just doesn't have all the details. So, if I'm going to get judged and punished, let it happen. But this isolation, this exile is intolerable. I'm sick of it. I want to be out of this house. I've been down the street from my father, the king, for 2 years. It's time to move on. And so Joab goes to the king, tries to set up a meeting. Joab went to the king and told him this. Then the king summoned Absalom, and he came in and bowed down with his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So Joab does the job. David says, fine, bring him. They bring Absalom in. It has been 5 years since he has seen his beautiful, popular, vindictive, murderous son. And Absalom comes in humbly. He's bowing down on the ground. His face is in the dirt in front of his father, the king. David kisses his son. My original thought was, oh, this is a nice, sweet thing. David is picking him up. He is embracing him, squeezing him around the neck, kissing him on the cheek, on the neck. I'm so glad you're back, son. It's great to see you. I'm not sure that's really totally accurate there. One commentator sees this exchange as being a totally formal act of just royal protocol. This is the way that you act when you come into the presence of the king, rather than this being some big music swelling, watery eye reconciliation between estranged father and son. What do you think?
Yes.
Crickets.
No, I said I agree with that. That doesn't sound like, hi, Dad. It's like more like, hello, Father.
Because we know that David is capable of deep emotion and commitment. I mean, when he and Jonathan were together, they loved each other better than brothers. He wept for Saul. He wept for Jonathan. Here, the description seems a little frosty, a little formal. Ladies, have any opinion?
No.
Okay.
I mean, if I were in David's shoes, having known what Joab did, putting words in the servant's mouth and everything, and then allowing him, I'd be really suspicious. And you know your kids. I mean, you know, okay, what's the ulterior motive here?
I guess that if I had some sort of preening peacock of a son who was demanding to see me and desperately wanted to see me as the king of the country, I might be a little suspicious too. What's the game, son? What's your plan? I'm not sure I would trust him, no matter how much I missed him. Okay, I look at 2 Samuel 14 and I try to come up with some sort of meaningful application for my life or for your life and think, beware. I don't really know what else to take from that chapter. The underlying thing in my head is what I try to tell my oldest children all the time. Don't do dumb stuff. Because there's going to be consequences for it later on, and David is now dealing with the consequences of very dumb stuff that a lot of his kids did years ago.
He was all strung along by the wise woman from Tekoa and Joab. And then 2 years go by before he actually sees. You know, he's losing control. Things are kind of slipping out of his hand.
Yeah.
Which was prophesied.
Well, let's go into 2 Samuel 15 then, because this really kind of just, that's the next move in the next act in the play here. 2 Samuel 15. The NIV labels this chapter Absalom's conspiracy. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. And whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear you." And then Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who had a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel.
Definite politician.
Yeah.
Ugh. Slick. So a couple years have passed since chapter 14. We learned that from verses 7 and 8. It's been like 7 years since Amnon's attack of Tamar. And so, again, Mr. Biding his time seems to have been doing just that, to prepare himself for something big. So, first, he gets himself a nice ride. Nice big chariot, beautiful horses to pull him around. And not only that, but he has a group of runners that go ahead of him saying, "Absalom's on the way. Hail, hail, son of David." I don't know what they do. But, you know, if everywhere I went, there were 50 people ahead of me announcing my arrival, that would kind of make me think I was probably a big deal. And it would probably make everybody else think that too. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Oh, it's Absalom. Look at that chariot. Look at those beautiful horses. Oh my gosh, his hair flowing in the wind as he drives. Ugh.
Politician and showman.
I just can't get over it. Second, he launches this campaign of sympathy or empathy. He's showing his compassion for the people. So the reason that he's out at the city gates is that at the city gates, that's where a lot of business and judgments took place. The elders of the city, whatever city it was, would sit at the city gate, and if somebody had a complaint, they would come up there and they would get it solved by the people at the city gate. People were coming to Jerusalem. They would go to the city gate, and then somebody, not sure who, some representative would take their case to the king, and he would determine if a judgment could be given or if he needed to see the case. So Absalom puts himself in the situation. I don't know if David is busy with, there's so much administration, so much warmongering, so much family drama. I mean, he's got all those wives and all those kids. It's got to be a zoo at the palace all the time. At any rate, people seem to not be getting the justice maybe that they would like to. Absalom knows about the backlog. He knows about the frustration of the people, and he says, "You know, if my dad would just appoint me judge, I would love to help you out with your problems, because I care about you, the little people. You matter. You matter to me. I take care of things like this for you." And so, actually, rather than dealing with it and trying to get them a resolution to their problems, all he's saying is, "Yeah, I'm so sorry. This really stinks. I just hope that someday I'd be able to help you out. Don't forget, vote for Absalom." He sends him home without any answer, but he ingratiates himself to all the people.
they seem satisfied.
Yeah, like, oh my gosh, we were in the presence of Absalom. Man, he is good looking. And he was so nice. Oh, he hugged me and kissed me. I love that man. He gave me a coffee mug. Third, everywhere he goes, Absalom is grabbing hands and hugging people. He's kissing babies, campaigning and politicking every place he goes. He's not dumb. He's very shrewd politician. He'd do well in Washington today. I think the spirit of Absalom is there. Although I can't think of any politicians that are exceptionally attractive.
And the flowing hair is just
Yeah.
not.
Probably the only one, and I dare not say it out loud, there is one representative that I have always thought is very attractive, but there's not much going on up in that, behind that red lipstick. Anyway, Absalom is seeking real power. He's currying favor with the people, and it is absolutely working. Verse 6 says he had stolen the hearts of the people of Israel. They love him. They love this vindictive, plotting, planning murderer. He's the best thing that ever happened to Israel. Where's he been all these years? Oh my gosh. I'm so glad he's here now. Verse 7. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living at Geshur in Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." Then the king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. He wants permission from the king. Look, I made this deal. We don't really know if he did or not, if this is just, the next piece of his puzzle. But the claim is that while he was in exile, he just said, "Oh, if I get to go back to Jerusalem, I promise I'm going to go to Hebron. I'm going to worship the Lord. I'm going to offer sacrifices to God if he'll just get me back to Jerusalem." And of course, David grants permission to his beautiful son to do this beautiful thing. And the last words that David will speak to his son Absalom are, "Go in peace." It seems like Absalom wants to go worship the Lord in the place of his birth. Remember, he was born in Hebron while David was the king there, when he was just the king of Judah. Lots of the kids were born there, I think 6 of them. But there isn't really anything beautiful or noble about Absalom's plans, which we're going to see right now in verse 10. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. "Hey, y'all want to go down to Hebron? I'm going to make a big sacrifice. Want to hang out with me? Ride along, be part of my entourage?" "Oh, yeah. Hanging with the prince? Yes, please, sign me up." While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. So, he's making this trip. He's going to go to his hometown. He's going to make a sacrifice there. He invites 200 officials, well-wishers, hangers-on, to go along with him to celebrate. It's a big deal. They're oblivious to anything else. He has also sent out advance teams to all of the cities in Israel to say, when you hear the trumpet blast, you announce Absalom is king in Israel. He's the king in Hebron. Okay, so trumpet blasts will go from one little village to the next little village. They're going to keep blowing them. That's the fastest way they could get message across. Send out people with this pre-planned message. The conspiracy is gaining in strength. And the word there for conspiracy means an unlawful alliance, a confederacy, treason, which is absolutely what's taking place. He is trying to steal the throne from his father. Even so, his following kept increasing. More and more Israelites were won over to Team Absalom as the days passed. Thoughts?
Already.
Well, I mean, you know,
Dawn doesn't like him at all.
he avenged Tamar. David didn't acknowledge that by saying, patting him on the head and saying, good boy. And so now he's fixing to take over.
Well, and
So is he planning on killing him?
the crazy thing is that, you know, he's always been about waiting for just the right moment to spring his plan. It would seem to me, if I was Absalom's friend and confidant, I would say, your dad is old.
Just wait.
You just hang on. The throne is eventually going to be yours anyway, and you can be spared all this underhanded, sneaky, low-down scoundrel stuff.
Yeah, but that's not his nature.
Apparently, he's willing to wait.
Years then, he wasn't gonna wait that long.
I am not a big Absalom fan either. I just think that he is going to do anything that he can to get ahead, which we're going to continue to see for a little bit longer as we work through
But is the Lord
2 Samuel.
still with David? Is he not with David anymore? Is he?
Funny you should mention that. Is the Lord with David? A messenger came and told David, verse 13, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. Crud. Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom, including himself.
So has he got a bigger army now than David has?
Well, he has a lot of followers. I don't know how big the army is, but he's got people. I think I believe that Absalom probably thinks he has more military support than he actually really would, which may factor in a couple chapters. But David includes himself in the none of us will escape from Absalom. He knows that he will do whatever. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword. The king's officials answered him, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses. So the king set out with his entire household following him. But he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. So the king set out with all the people following him, and they halted at the edge of the city. All his men marched past him, along with all the Kerethites and Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath marched before the king. Okay, so Dippy has got 200 unknowing allies, party boys, fun boys, who are with him for whatever they can get out of this deal. David has 600 soldiers from Gath, from Philistia, who have been with him for years, plus the Kerethites and the Pelethites. You remember hearing about them a few chapters ago? They're sort of like the secret service, the king's own bodyguard. They're big, scary dudes and foaming at the mouth, loyal to David. So David gets all of his family together, his whole household, And if you look at the chart we passed out at one point, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people, because you're not just taking your wives and children and grandchildren and servants, but all your advisors, all of your court, anybody that would be seen as being loyal to you, you want them out of there, or they're going to end up being dead by Absalom. So they're all marching out. The king says to Ittai the Gittite in verse 19, "Why should you come along with us? Go back, stay with King Absalom. You are a foreigner and exile from your homeland. You came only yesterday." Probably not actually yesterday. "And today shall I make you wander about with us when I don't know where I'm going? Go back, take your people back with you. May the Lord show you kindness and faithfulness." But Ittai replied to the king, "As surely as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it means life or death, there your servant will be." David said to Ittai, "Go ahead, march on." So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and the families that were with him. Okay, so I made some sort of note here. It's really interesting that this long time ago enemy of David's, this Philistine from Gath, the hometown of Goliath, that this man and his men have more devotion to David as the king than David's very own son. That's got to be hugely disappointing to David, that he can't even get his own son to treat him as well as this foreign man does. All of those men, the Gittites, the Kerethites, the Pelethites, they're all prepared to follow David anywhere he goes. And so they set out for the wilderness. They're taken off from Jerusalem. And they're covered a couple places that we read about in the New Testament. It says that they go out and they cross the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley is on the northeast corner of Jerusalem. And as you go across that valley, you end up on the side of the Mount of Olives, which you know about from the gospel accounts. Jesus spent a lot of time on the Mount of Olives. They stop at the edge of town. They offer sacrifices to God while all of these people, hundreds of soldiers and their wives, are making their way out to get out of the city so they can go and hide out in the wilderness again. And not only are they offering a sacrifice, there's other stuff going on there too. Verse 23, "The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness." Zadok was there too. Zadok is a Levite, probably a priest. They were with him carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. They set down the Ark of God, and Abiathar, also a priest, offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the Ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes," there you go, Don. "If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, 'I am not pleased with you,' then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him." The king also said to Zadok the priest, "Do you understand? Go back to the city with my blessing. Take your son Ahimaaz with you, and also Abiathar's son Jonathan. You and Abiathar return with your 2 sons. I will wait at the fords in the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So Zadok and Abiathar took the Ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. All right. So Zadok and Abiathar serving as priests and all the Levites who are in charge of taking care of all that kind of stuff. As the entourage is making its way out of the city, they're offering sacrifices, they're worshiping the Lord, they're praying, they've got the Ark of the Covenant right there, and David says, we're not taking that. I don't want you to go with me. The Ark is God's covenant with Israel. It is not God's covenant with me. The Ark of God belongs in the capital of his people. Take it back to Jerusalem. Stay there with it. Serve there with it. Take care of it. Just be there. And so they go along with it. And we read that David continues up in verse 30. David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too, and they were weeping as they went up. Okay, I just made a note. This is not the last time there will be a king crying on the Mount of Olives. Jesus is going to do the same thing.
Yep.
For kind of the same reasons. It's been sort of betrayed and handed over, and it looks like the end is near. We read there in verse 31, David had been told Ahithophel, who is his counselor, is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. And David said to him, if you go with me, you'll be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, your majesty, I will be your servant. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their two sons, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear. So Hushai, David's confidant, arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. Okay, so in case you didn't pick up what David's laying down there, his counselor Ahithophel has gone over to the enemy. He's gone over to the dark side. He's been with the king, now he's with
The other guy.
upstart boy. So this man Hushai says, in his sadness and grief, he's brokenhearted. I just want to come with you, David. You know, I appreciate that, but here's the thing. That's just one more person we've got to take care of, you and your family. You know what would be really helpful? Stay here. You stay here and work your way into Absalom's chambers. I want you to pretend that you are totally loyal to Absalom. And anytime that dumb Ahithophel says anything, I want you to turn it around so his plans get pushed aside because they're not very good. I need you to constantly be a thorn in Ahithophel's side. I need you to be sort of guiding Absalom into things that are not actually to his benefit, what he believes is the best thing. Well, now hey, you're not alone. I've already sent Zadok and Abiathar back into the city, and their two sons are going to be there as well. So if you hear anything, you see anything, there's something you believe I need to know, you get it to those guys, they'll get it to their sons, and they will come and fight me. Got it. If David is going to be ousted through conspiracy and plots, David is going to try to rescue his throne with conspiracy and plots as well. it is nice to see they actually prayed, even though it doesn't seem like a very noble prayer. Screw up his words. Make him sound like a dope. Make his words foolish. But I guess that's sometimes all we know how to pray. Is the Lord with David? I'm not sure.
Bless you.
It seems like he is. And David says, if the Lord's with me, he's going to bring me back into Jerusalem. But if not, I guess it'll be all right. Yes, Joanne?
I don't understand why it took David so long to where he had to leave his kingdom, his home. I mean, surely people were saying, hey, you know what Absalom's doing. Surely people were telling him why. I don't understand why, why now he comes up with this plan, why he couldn't come up with that before he had to leave his kingdom.
Here's my guess. And this is absolute pure speculation and conjecture. Because, it's hard to ask why questions. Why did this happen? Why did he? I don't know. Here's my guess, though. What is it that David was accused of for all of those years with King Saul? He's out to get you. He's going to run you out of town. He's going to overthrow you. He's going to make a coup. You're out, Saul. You got to get this guy and run him down. Hunt him down. Get rid of this rascal.
That's true.
I guess if I'm David, I might have for a while tried to believe about Absalom what he knew to be true about himself. He was never gunning for the throne. He didn't really want to be the king until it was the right time. But he ended up hiding, being a fugitive for years because somebody believed something that wasn't true. I cannot speak into David's mind and heart. But I could see how it's possible that David may have been trying to extend that same kind of grace to Absalom. Like, no, that's silly. There's no way Absalom's going to do that. He's not going to try to overtake me. That's all wild, crazy talk. There's nothing behind that. Until here, there's a plan in place. He has seen the trumpets. He's heard the plans. He knows that one of his own advisors has gone over to him. It's like, well, okay, I guess we better get out of town. That's the only thing that makes sense to me, is that he was trying to give the benefit of the doubt to his son, because he always does. He should have gotten the benefit of the doubt and didn't. Again, I'm not David, but that's the way my brain and heart would work. Deep thoughts? Other wild conjecture and speculation?
Well, this part of the end where it was Ahithophel might be, is that him? Ahithophel, yeah. Just go back there and check and do this and listen and let me know what's going on. Screw it up so we can't really make things too bad. He may not have had a positive plan in place with that information, but using what's his name?
Hushai is the guy on David's side. Ahithophel is the one who went over to Absalom.
Yeah, to make his words foolishness so he couldn't do too much damage.
So is Absalom making himself the king of Jerusalem?
He's declaring himself to be the king of, at least of Hebron, if not really the king of everything in Israel. That it's time for David to go. And I will again ask the question at the end of chapter 15 that I asked at the end of chapter 14. So what do we learn from this? Is there any kind of application that you see that is useful to us? This is why some animals eat their young.
I just can't figure out why David didn't talk to his son.
Well, this all happened, all of this happened because of David and Bathsheba.
Yeah. So
the fact that you're forgiven doesn't absolve you of the consequences. This is where the rubber's meeting the road right here.
that is probably sort of like an overarching application for multiple chapters here with David's family. David was forgiven by God for what happened with Bathsheba, but the consequences remain.
Truthful of that. That's very true.
Yeah. David and the Lord are good, but the prediction was the sword is not going to depart from your house. Your family is going to be messed up so bad. There's going to be constant strife and chaos and tension in your family. And that's what we see from this point on through the rest of Israel's history. Okay. When we get together next week, we will pick up with chapter 16, and I'm guessing probably chapter 17 as well, unless I get a wild hair and decide to pick up something else that I missed along the way. It's possible. All right. Any other deep thoughts or questions about our 2 chapters tonight?
David had a big army. Why didn't he just go wipe them out?
I know.
Except that that's his son. How do you do that?
Why did he not use the army? I don't know. Maybe he wasn't sure they'd follow him. Remember, who is it that wanted to bring Absalom back?
Oh, Joab.
Joab,
Yes, you're right.
the general of the army.
So is he now?
You
He's
just
the
can't
uncle,
trust
isn't he?
anybody.
David's
So is Joab with David now? Going to the mountain of Olives?
I would assume that that's the reason why the army hasn't been called into action, is because David's probably not exactly sure who he can trust.
That's true. I didn't think of that.
Stupid Joab, he screwed it up again. Joab is always playing his own game. Always.
So where is the army? They're just staying back in Jerusalem?
They might be out on a campaign somewhere, although
Yeah,
you'd think
they're
that Joab would be with them. And maybe he is here. He wasn't at the beginning of the chapter, but he doesn't really come up again at the end. So, I don't know.
Chapter 15. Or any of them. I mean, this took several.
There was a couple or 3 years. Yeah, there's some time that gets covered in those 2 chapters. Hitting the high spots. Okay. Excellent questions and wildly speculative answers. But they seem to make sense. Why would he not call the army? Because Joab is the commander and who knows what side he's on. He's the one who wanted to bring Absalom back. Maybe Joab and Absalom are in cahoots.
But then when he called him, he didn't go to him. And so he had to burn his barley field.
Yeah. Well, Joab is the one who made the introduction. He didn't just bring him back to town, but he's the one who said, all right, you really need to talk to Absalom. You really need to bring him back. I would be suspicious of him if I was David.
These 2 chapters, you can see David gradually losing control of the reins of leadership, the reins of power.
Yeah. He doesn't know who to trust. He can't even trust his own family. He can't trust people who have been with him Well, Joab is family. He's been with him since the beginning. But he's got these people,
600.
the Kerethites and the Pelethites and the Gittites, who used to be enemies. They're way more devoted to him than his own family and friends are.
He's got the 600 like
Well,
the
you
seals.
can pick your friends, but you can't pick
Seals.
your relatives, that's true too.
So, but Joab wasn't part of that 600, the elite.
He's probably sitting at home by the pool. Something. I got less love for Joab than I do for Absalom, and that's saying something. So. All right, well, we're going to wrap this up. Thanks for joining us for this installment of our study of David. You can always go back and check on some other things if you've missed them. It's possible that by now I will have added some things that didn't get recorded, but I guess you'll have to go back and look.
This would make a great
Thanks.
movie.